Hi, welcome to the session number 3, tutorial number 1. Estimate activity resources process. Estimate activity resources is the process of estimating the type and the quantities of material, human resources, equipment, or supplies required to perform each activity. The key benefit of this process is that it identifies the type, quantity, and characteristics of resources required to complete the activity, which allows more accurate cost estimates and duration estimates. This particular video talks about four major areas. Number one, estimate activity resources process. We're going to learn all the activities involved in the process named estimate activity resources, which is a part of planning resources. Second, resource calendars, another tool that's been used in order to estimate the activity resources. Then we are going to learn bottom-up estimating, which is a widely used technique to estimate the activity resources. Lastly, we're going to explore the process components involved in this process. According to PM Buck, estimate activity resources is the process of estimating team resources, time, and the type and quantities of the materials, equipment, and supplies necessary to perform the project work. Why do you have to do that? It's simply because as you start the project, plan the project, it's important that we have an accurate estimation for the resources required. However, for you to come up with accurate estimations, the project requirements have to be stabilized. If you look at the traditional way of project management and the agile way of project management, how you handle the estimation is totally different. In a traditional environment, what you do is prepare the detailed work breakdown structure and the requirement specification before you estimate the activity resources. So by the time you estimate the activity resources, you have the finalized set of requirements. But in agile approach, as we are not focusing in sealing the requirements, finalizing all the requirements, we may start with the information we have. So our estimations will need to be somewhat vague. However, the approach will allow you to mitigate the risk involved in planning the resources. We may discuss this later. What we are trying to figure out here is that what will be required for the project in terms of resources. This question has multiple components. What type of resources will be required? This could be raw materials, equipments, and other resources you use to complete the project. Pretty much anything that is being used in a project other than the cost is considered the resource. Cost is estimated using a separate process. There's a separate process in order to look into the cost perspective, which is called cost management. What is the quantity and the quality of the resources needed is another question that you need to ask. It's very important to understand how quality your resources are. How many of the resources are required during the project? If we want to finish the project earlier, speed it up, we may use more expertise than a usual scenario. So it's important that you understand the complexity and the difficulty level of any given project and accordingly arrange the expertise needed for that project. What are the other attributes of these resources? What's the skill level needed to complete the project effectively? how productive they can be. Similar attributes can go for other non human resources as well. What's the strength or the durability of such resources? Each of these also may help to determine the duration of any given project. So it's important that you invest some significant time in this process and understand what is the timeline, what level of resources required, how many numbers of resources required. It's important that you use uniform units in estimating activity resources. That's because these uniform units are much more easily aggregated, reported, and understood. It's okay to use whatever the measure works for you, but they should be standardized. Throughout the project, it needs to be the same measures and units used. Requirements should be standardized in format and unit of measure when possible. Data presentations like graphics and various graphs may follow the same measures as well. Even when reporting, it's important that you use the same units and measures to ensure you would interpret the information in the same way. Now, the level of details of your estimates may vary based on the project and area of focus. If your project requires a single digit of human resources, getting that number right is absolutely critical because if that number is wrong, your project will be hugely impacted. However, if the project requires a lot more resources, hundred of resources for that matter, getting one number wrong might not be so critical. However, how good your estimates, how accurate your resource estimations, your project planning and the execution will be good. It's not a secret that better estimates enable better project management because during the project planning phase, we estimate the resources required for the project execution and the closure. So if these numbers are wrong hugely, it's going to impact the project delivery, it's going to impact the timeline, it's going to impact the scope. So all the three project constraints will be disturbed. If you have heard about the fourth parameter, that is a value delivery, that is also impacted when the resource estimations are not right. However, at the beginning of the project, you don't need to estimate all the resources in detail for the entire project duration. You may work on progressive elaboration, the most critical areas of your requirements can be considered for your estimation. So as the time goes, you may work on the other areas and estimate the resources needed. I think that will be the best approach in order to mitigate the risk around your estimations. In Agile, this is emphasized further. As you know, in Agile context, we do not sign a very detailed, a complete requirement specification for a bigger project. What we do is progressive elaboration. We work on small chunks and deliver them. As we move on, we adjust the scope and ensure that the bigger picture is being met. Now, as you might expect, the estimating activity resources process ties in very closely to several. Most importantly, the estimate cost process. After all, there might be several resources that are capable of completing an activity, but the one that we pick will often be a factor of several project constraints. If the budget is our priority, we may end up going with a more affordable provider, even if it takes a little longer. If time is our key priority and we are really focused on project duration, then we may be willing to pay more. However, you'll always see the balance here between resources and the cost associated with them, both in terms of dollars and in terms of time. Cost can help dictate which resources are available to us in the first place. Some may simply be too cost prohibitive to even get our hands on or to entertain. It can also certainly dictate which are selected. Even if we do have several options under our control, we may be biased towards one or more of these because they match our cost profile better. Cost can also dictate the resource productivity level. Perhaps, for example, if you have a machine that runs for 24 hours time, if it's going to be too costly for us, even though it is the most required thing, we may have to compromise the timing that the machine runs. Let's have a look at the resource calendars. Keeping track of the schedules and time management is one of the most fundamentally important tasks that are the responsibility of the project management team and the project management team leader. One of the best ways to accomplish this feat is through the careful and well orchestrated use of calendars to keep track of the multitude of project related events, occurrences, and dates that will take place during the project's life cycle. One of these types of calendars that is often utilized and implemented by the project management team and the project management team leader is that of the resource calendar. The resource calendar refers to the specific calendar that lists all of the working days as well as all of the non-working days that the project management team and the project management team leader need to utilize in order to determine the specific dates on which a specific resource of element is being utilized or engaged versus the dates on which they may in fact be inactive. So resource calendars identify the working days or the shifts when particular resources are available or in use. At the same time, it also tells you what are the days where the resources are not active or available. This will allow you to run the project smoothly, knowing what exactly the resource allocation and availability. If any adjustments needed, looking at the resource calendars, you can make those adjustments. Resource calendars also enable more efficient use of resources. It allows the project manager and the project management team to adjust the allocation of the resources based on the resource calendars. So if there are any changes, you will update the resource calendars to reflect the changes. So anyone who wants to get such information, they just need to look at the resource calendars. So if anyone makes any change, that will be reflected in the resource calendar. So it gives you the visualization that is required in order to manage the resources for your project effectively. Resource calendars also influence the sequence of activities in project schedule management process. In your project schedule management process, you will look at the schedule of your activities. So looking at the schedule of your activities, the sequence of your activities, you can simply allocate the resources and vice versa. So if you know what exactly the resource availability and allocation Accordingly, the sequence activities can be facilitated. So, in a nutshell, resource calendars is absolutely useful for the project managers and project management teams. So resource calendars can be a very helpful tool for the project management teams and project managers. It primarily identifies the working days or shifts when particular resources are available or in use. At the same time, it also talks about the resource unavailability, resource gaps for the given time window. Resource calendars enable more efficient use of resources. It provides a visualization of the resource availability and assignments, which allows the project management team or the project manager to adjust the resources accordingly. Or looking at the resources, resource manager or the project manager can also adjust the other knowledge areas, other activities, other processes. Resource calendar also influence the sequence activities in project scheduling management process. Project schedule management process will talk about the schedule that is applicable for the given project life cycle. So looking at the resource calendar, the project manager can make necessary adjustments into the sequence of activities. And this can be done vice versa. Example, if you know what is your sequence activities, based on the sequence of activities, the project resources can be adjusted as well. However, the well-built of the resources and other attributes of the resources may affect such adjustment. Now let's have a look at an example of a resource calendar. Now in this example, we consider four activities to work on. However, we'll be demonstrating some of these activities in our resource calendar. So there are three resources involved in this particular project. They are Isuru, Sam, and Udaro. Activity 1 takes 20 units to complete, and activity 2 is a 6 units of work. Activity 3 may take 30 units to complete, and activity 4 is a 20 units work. So if any of these three resources work on any of these activities based on the capacity that they can handle within a given day, we may calculate the duration. Isuru works 5 units per day, whereas Sam works only 2 units per day. Udara could contribute with 3 units per day. Let's dive in. In this example, we have two activities, namely activity 1 and activity number 2. We may assign two resources to work on these two activities. So let me say Isuru is working on activity 1, whereas Sam works on activity 2. So if you look at Isuru's and Sam's daily capacity, Isuru works 5 units per day, whereas Sam can only work 2 units per day. So if you look at the total size of the activities, activity 1 takes 20 units and activity 2 is a 6 units of work. So when Izur works on activity number 1, he takes 4 days to complete the complete activity, whereas Sam will take 3 days to complete it. So far, in the previous example, we had allocated only Izuru and Sam. We have Uddara who does not have any activity assigned for the moment. So if you want to assign the pending two activities to Uddara, let's see how it will be reflected in the resource calendar. Now, talking about activity 3, that is a 30 units of work. What is the capacity that Uddara can handle for a day? That is 10 units. So if Uddara works on activity 3, he needs 3 days to complete that activity. Same way, when Uddara works on activity number 4, he needs just 2 days to complete the activity. Cost availability and scheduling constraints may result in different resources being utilized. Although you see above allocation, if you have various constraints, resource allocation may change. For example, if you have a budgetary constraint, although purple resource is gonna take longer time than any other resources, you may prefer him over the rest because purple resource is more affordable than the rest. Time management processes interact more than those in many other project management knowledge areas. Think about sequencing activities, estimating activity resources, estimating activity durations, and then developing the project schedule as a whole. Not to mention estimating cost for all of this, which you find in a separate knowledge area. All four of these, and really all five of these, really interact thoroughly throughout the process because which decisions are best for you or for your project depend on what your risk profile looks like, what the priorities of the organization. All of these will affect the others. Sequencing may require that we use resources in a certain way. Our different project constraints may suggest that we use certain resources over others, and which resources we use will directly impact what the duration of the project will be, leading into the overall development of the schedule. Now, resource calendars are considered to be part of estimating activity resources for the obvious reasons, but they are also heavily used. Time management processes interact more than those in many other project management knowledge areas. Think about sequencing activities, estimating activity resources, estimating activity durations, and then developing the project schedule as a whole. Not to mention estimating cost for all of this, which you find in a separate knowledge area. All four of these, and really all five of these, really interact thoroughly throughout the process because which decisions are best for you or for your project depend on what your risk profile looks like, what the priorities of the organization. All of these will affect the others. Sequencing may require that we use resources in a certain way. Our different project constraints may suggest that we use certain resources over others, and which resources we use will directly impact what the duration of the project will be, leading into the overall development of the schedule. Now, resource calendars are considered to be part of estimating activity resources for the obvious reasons, but they are also heavily